Have you ever shared something deeply personal with someone, only to feel uneasy for days afterward, worried they might see you differently? That feeling like you trusted the wrong person, like you opened a door that should have stayed closed, is more common than you think. You're not alone. Almost everyone has experienced it at least once. Today, I want to share with you 5 things, just 5 that can deeply impact your peace of mind and how others perceive you. These are things I believe are best kept to yourself, not out of secrecy, but because sometimes silence is the best way to protect yourself. And if you've ever hesitated before saying something important or been hurt because someone knew too much about you, take a few minutes for this video. Maybe just one of the 5 things I'm about to share can help you avoid an uncomfortable situation down the road. If this message resonates with you, feel free to like or subscribe, not to support me, but so you always have a quiet place to return to, where we can reflect on life's little things. Before we dive in, maybe I should tell you a bit about myself. I'm not a life coach or a self-help expert. I'm just someone who's been through enough in life, someone who's shared what seemed like harmless thoughts, only to be left with plenty to reflect on. I started recording these thoughts not with any big goal, but simply to create a small personal space for myself and for those who sometimes just need a pause in this noisy world. Maybe you're watching this while working, driving, or simply looking for something to make you think a little deeper. Whatever the reason, I truly appreciate your presence here. Now, picture this. You're sitting in a quiet coffee shop. Across from you is someone you've only recently gotten to know. The conversation is light, enjoyable. Then suddenly, you open up about something that's weighed on you for years. The moment passes, and you think they'll forget. But a few weeks later, you hear that same story being discussed somewhere else. Out of context. Twisted. But it's still about you. Just one experience like that is enough to understand why some things are better left unsaid. I'm not here to warn you or make you anxious. My only goal is to share from personal experience what I believe are the kinds of things that, when kept to yourself, can lead to a quieter, more peaceful life. And to guide you through this journey, I've broken the content into clear parts. Each part is a slice of life. From seemingly harmless regrets to more complex topics like future plans or personal finances. Every section comes with a story, a perspective, and a gentle reminder to help you reflect and choose what feels right for you. We won't talk about absolute rights or wrongs. There are no moral lessons here. Just real thoughts from someone who has tried being open and received both trust and doubt in return. I don't expect you to agree with everything I say, but if even one small idea helps you, then, to me, this video has done its job. So, let's begin with the first part. The very first thing I believe we should keep to ourselves. There are things that, when kept to yourself, gradually settle like sand sinking to the bottom of a lake. But when spoken out loud, especially to someone who doesn't truly understand you, they become like a pebble thrown into water, creating ripples you can't foresee. Regret is one of those things. It's a very real part of life, something everyone has, but for that very reason, it doesn't need to be the topic of unnecessary conversations. I once shared a poor investment decision with a friend. At the time, I thought I was opening up, trying to let go of the past by talking about it. I said I had put quite a bit of money into a project that sounded promising but lacked proper research. The project failed. I didn't just lose money. I lost trust in myself for a long time. That friend listened silently. I felt relieved, thinking I had overcome a part of myself. But not long after, during a casual gathering, when everyone was chatting and laughing, he brought up that story. Not with bad intent, but with a joking tone that made everyone laugh. I laughed too, but it was a laugh that masked disappointment. Since then, I've realized there are sorrows that don't need to be spoken. Not because they're shameful, but because they're personal lessons. When you share your regrets, you unintentionally give someone an outdated version of yourself. And that might make them see you through a distorted lens, someone who failed, someone who makes mistakes, or worse, someone not trustworthy in certain matters. People may say they don't judge, but reality often says otherwise. Because human nature remembers what leaves a strong impression, and regret, often tied to mistakes, tends to leave a mark in others' minds. According to some psychological studies, the human brain tends to remember negative experiences more deeply than positive ones. It's a survival mechanism, helping us stay alert and learn from past errors. However, that same mechanism also turns stories of regret into lasting imprints, not just for ourselves, but for those who've heard them. They might forget the times you helped them or listened to them, but they'll remember the time you did something disappointing. That's not anyone's fault, it's just how we process information. I'm not saying we have to live closed off or hide everything. But I believe some stories are best left in a private corner, where only we know them, and from there, quietly learn and grow. Regret is like a scratch on wood. It might not break the plank, but if constantly exposed to the light, it can cause people to see only the flaws instead of the strength of the whole structure. Of course, everyone needs to share, but not every form of sharing brings relief. Choose the right person, the right moment, and more importantly, ask yourself, why am I sharing this? To be understood, to seek validation, or just to release a feeling? If the answer leans toward emotional relief, sometimes a blank sheet of paper, a voice recording never sent, or a quiet walk alone is enough to let it out. I learned this in a somewhat regrettable way. But in return, I've preserved an inner calm not because I no longer make mistakes, but because I know mistakes don't define me. They're just small pieces of a bigger picture and no one but me has the right to highlight or fade them. Keeping regrets to yourself isn't about denying the past, it's a way to protect the present, so we can walk lighter, without the weight of others' judgments, without old stories clouding the good things we have now. If you're holding on to something that makes you restless, try putting it away for a while. Who knows, when you look back, you might see it was just a small turning point leading to a better version of yourself. There are pains that don't show through words and don't need to be understood by others, because only we are the ones living with them every day. It's easy to casually mention a lingering knee pain or restless nights caused by some chronic illness, especially when meeting someone familiar. But if it happens often enough, you'll start to notice something. The other person's gaze becomes less focused, their tone more polite, and the conversation ends sooner than before. Not because they're unkind or uncaring, but simply because pain isn't always something that should be shared as naturally as a greeting. I once knew someone who had a minor surgery every year. Nothing serious, but whenever he met someone, he would describe everything in detail, from the checkups, what the doctor said, to what he had to avoid eating. At first, everyone listened with sympathy. But gradually, conversations with him became repetitive and dull. Every story began with a sigh. Eventually, many started avoiding him not because they didn't care, but because they didn't know how to respond when every story revolved around one thing: pain. Sharing emotions is natural, even necessary. But not everyone has the energy to carry someone else's pain, especially when they're already struggling with their own unspoken burdens. Talking too much about one's health, if not with the right person at the right time, can make the listener feel overwhelmed or forced to show sympathy. From there, a distance slowly forms, one the sharer might not even notice. This doesn't mean we have to pretend to be fine or always stay positive. There are days when the body is tired, the spirit is low, that's real and shouldn't be denied. But keeping a part of the pain to ourselves can sometimes be an act of kindness, not just to ourselves but also to those around us. Because not everyone is a doctor, and not everyone is close enough to carry another person's emotional weight. You may think you're just telling a story, but the listener might feel they're being handed an invisible responsibility to comfort, to respond, to give advice, while they too may be needing the same. Instead of oversharing, be selective. A close friend, a partner, or someone with real experience in the matter. That's who you should share with when needed. For the rest, learn to wear optimism like a light jacket, not to hide, but to protect the ease in your relationships. A smile, a light-hearted story. Sometimes these can heal more than any complaint. I once heard a saying, sometimes silence is the best painkiller. Silence doesn't mean loneliness. Silence means choosing not to let pain become the center of your life. It means leaving space in conversations for positivity, for laughter, for things that help both people feel a little better after meeting. And maybe, by keeping part of the pain to yourself, you create space for other, lighter things to grow. A friend who still wants to meet because talking to you feels good. A relationship not bound by the duty to console. And most importantly, you still keep the right to decide. Today, do I want to speak or stay silent? Some things, when said to the right person at the right time, become medicine. But when told to the wrong person in the wrong setting, they can become wounds. Personal pain, already uncomfortable, doesn't need to become a constant part of every conversation. Keep a little privacy, not because you fear others knowing, but because you deserve peaceful pauses in your own life. Resentment is a very familiar emotion. It comes from real hurt, unmet expectations, or words that sting deep inside. That feeling is not wrong, nor is it bad. But the problem is, when resentment is retold too many times, it's no longer just a personal experience. It becomes a cycle of negativity that can spread and damage many other relationships. I still remember something I occasionally think about, not to blame anyone, but to remind myself. Back then, I once vented my frustration about a friend to another friend. At the time, I thought I was simply letting out some emotions, with no bad intentions. I talked about how that person broke a promise, about the feeling of disappointment and letdown. The friend who listened nodded along, seemed sympathetic, and even added a few things that made me feel I wasn't wrong. But a few weeks later, the story reached the person I had been upset with. Not in full, not in context, and of course without the part where I had spoken kindly about them before. From then on, that relationship cracked. Even though I later explained, the trust never returned to how it was. It all started from a private conversation I thought would stay private. When you share resentment with someone who isn't discreet, you're not only hurting the absent person but also deepening the wound within yourself. Each time you retell it, you relive the negative feeling all over again. And if the listener isn't mature enough, the story gets exaggerated, distorted, and turned into gossip, in places where you're not present, with details you never even said. Resentment is like a drop of black ink on a white tabletop. At first, it's just a small stain. But if you don't wipe it away and let it sit, it spreads, seeps into the wood grain, and leaves a lasting mark. The same happens in relationships. Just one wrong listener can turn your discomfort into a reason for others to misjudge someone or misjudge you. So, when you feel frustrated or resentful, how do you keep it from taking control? How do you prevent that emotion from leaking out in ways that cause harm? There are simple but effective methods I've used. Writing it down is one of them. No need for structure, no logic required, just write exactly what you're thinking. Let the words do the releasing. Once you're done, you can read it or not, just tear it up or put it away in a drawer. What matters is that the emotion has left your mind without hurting anyone else. Another way, if the heavy feeling lingers too long, is to talk to someone professional, a therapist, or at least someone truly trustworthy and neutral. Not for advice, but simply to be heard in a safe space. When you talk to someone who isn't directly involved, the story has a better chance of being gently unraveled, instead of spiraling into something more complicated, like it might when told to someone close to both parties. Life already has enough unpredictability. We can't avoid feeling hurt or disappointed, but we can choose how to respond. Keeping a bit of resentment inside, if you need to, is normal. But make sure it doesn't spread, doesn't become a repeated story at every meeting, doesn't become the energy that damages other connections. Because when you learn to manage how you handle resentment, you're not only preserving relationships, you're also healing yourself. No one is perfect at handling emotions, but if possible, learn to let your anger end on a blank page, instead of spreading through careless conversations. Sometimes, timely silence is not suppression, it's the choice of someone who knows how to protect peace. Some plans, if spoken too early, may not receive support. Some numbers, if revealed, are more than just data. They become invitations for exploitation. Plans and finances, two seemingly unrelated things, share one common trait. The fewer people who know, the easier it is to breathe. I still remember the first time I sat in front of my computer, fumbling around, trying to create a YouTube channel. I didn't have high expectations, nor did I think I was going to share anything big. I just wanted to tell a few small stories, share some thoughts, as a way to document the journey after retirement. I didn't tell anyone, not even family. Not because I was hiding it, but because I didn't want any comments to interfere with me in what I was starting. When you haven't done anything yet and you talk about it, people tend to give feedback in two ways, either overly optimistic and unrealistic, or so pessimistic that it discourages you. The first kind says, "That's great, go for it. Who knows, you might get famous." The second frowns and asks, "Why start a YouTube channel all of a sudden? Who's going to watch?" And just like that, before you even begin, you feel like you have to prove something, when really, you just wanted to try something for yourself. I did it in silence, filmed it myself, edited it myself, uploaded it myself, and rewatched it myself. The first video only had a few dozen views, but that feeling, that sense of completing something without needing anyone's approval or permission, made me feel alive again. A few months later, acquaintances started discovering the channel. Some were surprised. "Hey, why didn't you say anything?" I just smiled. Not saying anything doesn't mean you don't trust anyone. It simply means that some things, when kept to yourself, give you the chance to do them your own way. There's something I realized after that. If you're truly serious about a plan, nurture it in silence, like how people germinate seeds underground. When it has enough roots and strength, it will rise on its own. But if you expose it to other people's opinions too soon, you won't know whether you're doing it for yourself or for someone else. But keeping plans private is only half the story. The other half, often even more sensitive, is finances. I'm not wealthy, but I've been in a position long enough to understand. Once others think you're well off, the way they treat you will change, sometimes in very surprising ways. A few years ago, I casually shared online that I had bought a small vacation home in the South. I wasn't showing off, just a brief mention in a video. A week later, the messages started coming in. Some congratulated me, but others, people I hadn't heard from in years, suddenly reached out. The first message was about my health. The second, when can we come visit? Of course, if it had been someone truly close, it wouldn't have mattered. But some of them I had to pause for a few seconds just to remember who they were. You'd be surprised how many people suddenly care more than usual once they think you have money. They don't ask for anything outright, but their words, their eyes, even their unusually friendly tone all carry the same message. Can I get a little piece of that? And if you say no, you'll sense a subtle disappointment even if they don't realize they're showing it. Money itself isn't the problem. It only becomes one when paired with expectations from others. And sometimes, it's your own openness that causes it. You share a number, a detail that seems harmless, but to some people, that becomes the basis for an entire scenario you never invited them into. Like plans, finances should be shared selectively. The people who need to know will know. The rest, silence is a gentle but effective barrier. It doesn't push anyone away, but it also doesn't invite anyone in too closely. I've been asked, isn't it hard to keep things so private? Honestly, no. Because when you keep something to yourself, you don't have to explain, don't have to justify, don't have to worry about what others think. You just focus on living in line with what you believe matters. And that, to me, is freedom. Plans and finances aren't taboo, but they're two areas most easily misunderstood when shared with the wrong ears. And once misinterpreted, the consequences aren't just uncomfortable feelings, they can be cracks in relationships you thought were solid. Keeping things private doesn't mean you lack trust. It's a subtle form of protection for what truly matters, especially in an age where just a few status updates can tell people where you are, what you're doing, how much you earn, and where you're going next. The more people know, the more easily you get tied to their expectations. But when you keep a bit of privacy, you create breathing space for yourself. And if you have a plan in the works, or a big life change ahead, try keeping it to yourself for a while. Not to hide it, but to see whether, without anyone watching, you still have the motivation to continue. If the answer is yes, then maybe you're already on the right path. In the end, when you look back on this entire journey, you might realize one thing. Some things are kept to yourself, not because you want to hide them, but because you want to cherish them. Regret is a feeling easily misunderstood if shared in the wrong place. Personal pain, when told too often, can weigh others down instead of drawing empathy. Resentment, if left unchecked, can turn into unnecessary cracks in relationships that were once very good. Plans, when spoken too early, can be judged before they've even taken shape. And finances, the most private matter, can sometimes become complicated simply because of too much openness. These 5 things may seem simple, but when you learn to hold them back at the right time, in the right place, you'll find life becomes much lighter. Not everyone needs to understand you completely, and no one is responsible for empathizing with everything you've been through. You have the right to choose what belongs to you and what can be shared. If this video resonates with what you've been through, feel free to leave a comment. It can be a small story or simply something you once chose to keep to yourself. These shares not only help me understand the person listening, but also help others feel that they're not alone in their thoughts. And if you want to continue this journey, in the next video, we'll talk about the things that should be shared not for validation, but for connection and healing. Thank you for listening all the way through. I hope you leave this video feeling a little lighter and seeing yourself a little more clearly.